Greetings, and here we are again trying to continue on with American history. This will be the first video in regard to Unit 3, a summary of Unit 3, and hopefully some assistance for you to answer the questions in the Unit 3 exam. I will do the same thing. I'll try to do the same thing as I did with the other two units. I'll give you this particular video, which should cover the first two questions in the unit exam, and then a third one, a second essay that will help you, a second video which will help you to understand industrialization, which is the third question on the Unit 3 exam. So let's get started on trying to understand what's happening in this unit. In order to fully understand what's happening, we have to, let me see, I want to get to, sorry about this. Okay, in order to fully understand what's happening in this unit, we need to kind of put an end to the second unit. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go to week 7, and we're going to go to course materials in week 7. And we're going to go to this Founding Fathers PowerPoint. And the reason why we're going to do that is because I want to reiterate what it was that the Founding Fathers had in mind when they were putting together this new Constitution and putting together this new country. Keep in mind that these men who created this new Constitution, who created this new government, were basically speaking men of the Enlightenment, men who were considered to be Republican gentlemen. In other words, they were wealthy, they were educated, they were intelligent, and because of that, they were disinterested. They could do all kinds of work for the government without worrying about their pocketbook. More importantly, they believed that the country should be run by what they called the meritocracy. In other words, they believed that the leaders of this country were those people that were the most accomplished, the most intelligent, the property owners, and so they understand, because of their accomplishments, they understand how the government should be run. In other words, the Founding Fathers are very elitist types of guys. They created a government in which the meritocracy, that the idea was that the meritocracy was going to run the government. In other words, they were not big fans of democracy. They were not big fans of the common, ordinary American running around with his finger up his nose. They believed that they were the ones that should be representing, they believed in republicanism, small r, which means that they existed for the good of the people. In other words, the government would be run by those people who are the most intelligent and the most educated, et cetera, et cetera. And they believed that the American public would put those people into power. As a matter of fact, if we look at the Constitution, we know that they put checks into that Constitution to prevent the average everyday man from picking the wrong people. For example, and the only directly elected person in the new federal government would be the person in the House of Representatives. That is the only, in the original Constitution, that is the only person that's directly elected by the people. In the original Constitution, the Senate is handpicked by the state legislature. In other words, it is the state the meritocracy, sorry, it's the state meritocracy that is picking the federal government meritocracy. When we look at the president, we know, hopefully we know because of what we're talking about right now, that the president was not directly elected by the people, but that we, the people, elect electors who are the meritocracy, and that meritocracy is going to handpick the president. So that's called the Electoral College. So the Founding Fathers literally created a constitution where there were barriers between the common ordinary people and the government. So I wanted to repeat all of that information because I want you to understand that that's exactly what the Founding Fathers had in mind. A republic, small r, that they, the meritocracy, would control. The problem is that the people took the Declaration of Independence at its word. They had convinced the people that this government was going to be for the, that people were going to be free, that they were going to be part of the government and all that sort of stuff. So what the Founding Fathers believed would happen is not exactly what would happen. What they quickly found out was that they were easily swayed by ordinary men who were only looking out for themselves. And before the Constitution even was created, states were being run by what Madison called social inferiors, such as uneducated printers, shop boys, and raw schoolmasters. So in other words, this concept that the Founding Fathers came up with is not working very well. As Madison said, the mob had taken control of the asylum, the common everyday guy. And the reason why I wanted to do this little piece first is because it explains what will happen in the 1820s in regard to the election of Andrew Jackson, the eventual election of Andrew Jackson. If you've been doing your studying, you know that Andrew Jackson ran for president in 1824, I believe it was, and lost in a runoff in the House of Representatives to John Quincy Adams. That's John Adams' son. And so therefore, he got really angry about all of that. He had actually the more popular vote. But more importantly, what I wanted to point out was that this popular sense of democracy and people getting involved is now beginning to take root by the 1820s. So that in the 1828 election, Andrew Jackson will be elected by the people of the United States. Now, let me go to that one. That's in chapter 10, the chapter 10 section. Here's Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's election is the final result of this transferal of power from the meritocracy that the Founding Fathers had created to the people. And a lot of that, if you're doing your homework, you know that, and reading, that what's happening is that the states are changing requirements for people who could vote. Originally, again, Founding Fathers wanted people who had property, who had intellectual backgrounds and things like that, be the ones that are actually doing the voting. the states now are beginning the process of changing that so that if you are an American citizen, if you're free, white, and 21, you can, and male, you could vote. And so by the 1828 election, we have a large population of people in the, particularly, again, white Anglo-Saxon males, who now can vote, and Andrew Jackson is the result of that. Andrew Jackson is the first of what we might call the modern day presidents. He is not one part of the, intellectual group of people. He does not have a college degree. He is a wild guy from the West, Indian fighter, bear shooter, and all that sort of stuff. The reason why he wins is because of this transference of power from the meritocracy to the common ordinary man. In other words, we're starting to move more toward democracy. And we may or may not like that idea. The problem, I would suggest to you, with moving towards democracy is that now leaders are moving away from that Republican gentleman concept of disinterest and I'm doing it for the public good. They're moving away from that. And Andrew Jackson is, I think, a perfect example of moving away from that concept. Andrew Jackson comes into office in a very modern kind of way, where the founding father types were very modest, and they sat back and let the system work out. Andrew Jackson and his followers, his Democratic Party, got out there and literally, got the masses involved and all psyched up. They would have parades and parties, and they would give out liquor. Liquor would flow very generously, and even on the day of the election, they would have the election in a bar, and they would have a party after they were elected. So the way that presidents were voted into power would be transformed by Andrew Jackson and the Democratic Party at the time. So Andrew Jackson is considered to be the first of the modern presidents, what we would call a modern day president. I would suggest to you that there were a lot of things that the general public, liked about Andrew Jackson. He was one of them. Imagine, if you will, Andrew Jackson riding down the street on his horse, and some poor woman holding the hand of her son on the side of the road, and pointing to Andrew Jackson, saying to her son, look, there's Andrew Jackson. He's the president of the United States. He was not born rich. He didn't have an education. He didn't have all the trappings of our founding fathers. He's just a regular, everyday kind of guy. And guess what? My son, you too can become a president of the United States. So there is this sense that Andrew Jackson brings to bear, that anyone could be the president of the United States. This becomes the American dream. He is the embodiment, the poster child, if you will, of the American dream. Anybody can be anything, no matter what their background, etc. So he's born in poverty. First man that comes out of the West. He's Tennessee. Was the first president without a formal education. So again, all these things saying, oh yeah, this is a common ordinary guy that we really like. And I'm not sure, I'm not real positive that's a real good thing, because what that does is it brings into office men who don't necessarily have all the prerequisites of being a good president. At any rate, as soon as he comes in, the inauguration is a zoo. He opens up the doors of the White House. He says, "This is the people's house. Anybody can come in." And people were coming in with their muddy shoes and the dung and the stuff from the streets, and they were plowing through the White House that James Madison's wife, Dolly Madison, had taken so much care to put together and to be proud of. You know, this is the White House, the place where democracy is held. But at any rate, big, huge party. They opened up the kegs of whiskey again. People were climbing all over the furniture and getting drunk. And as a matter of fact, Andrew Jackson, the place was such a riot that Andrew Jackson couldn't even stay there the night of the inauguration. He ended up staying in some hotel. At any rate, so that's the chaos that is Andrew Jackson. He immediately begins this process of kind of turning the meritocracy on its head. He creates this spoils, what is called the spoils system, which comes from the concept of to the victor goes the spoils. In other words, whoever wins the election can do whatever they damn well please. And typically in government, that means giving away government jobs to the people who are helpful to him. I'm going to go through a couple of these other things that happened in his administration, something called log rolling, which is basically where in the legislative branch, where legislators are basically basing their decisions on a law, on whether it helps them. You know, this kind of, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of thing. You help me build this road, I'll help you build your bridge, that sort of thing. A more important part that comes out of the Jackson administration is something called lobbying, which still exists today, I hope we know. Lobbying simply means that we have representatives of I don't know, anybody that has their own personal cause, let's say the National Rifle Association, for example, standing outside in the lobby of the Congress, basically bribing legislators to vote certain ways that are going to help them. So, the example I have here, a gun manufacturer pays off legislators to vote yes on a gun appropriation bill. Gerrymandering also is something that started during this time that is very detrimental to our system. Basically, what happens in a gerrymandering is that hopefully we know that every 10 years on the first year of the decade, we have a census to know how many people there are in the country, so that we know who gets what representation in the House of Representatives. At that point, every state has certain electors given to them. They set up electoral districts, and those districts now can be manipulated. That's what gerrymandering means. The system is basically manipulated, the voting districts realigned so that we could stuff in as many of our supporters as possible into that district in order to ensure that we're always going to win that district. So there are there are lots of gerrymandered districts in our country today that no matter what happens, that party is going to win. I'll use the example of the district that Jamestown is in. Chances of a Democrat winning the district that we live in is slim to none because of the way that the district is gerrymandered. So basically speaking, and hopefully we get this idea that this spoils system is, in fact, a corruption of the democratic process. We no longer make disinterested decisions. We no longer make decisions based on what is good for all. We are now beginning to make decisions based on what is good for that individual or what's good for my constituency, the people in my congressional district or in my state. Okay, also in this essay, you're asked about nullification. One of the things that happened during this time was a tariff was passed. It was called the Tariff of Abomination, was passed by Congress that raised tariffs very, very high. It was very detrimental to particularly southern states who were trying to get their cotton and tobacco and all that sort of stuff sold. And tariffs are not good for, hopefully we know, tariffs are not good for planter kinds of people. Tariffs are particularly good for the northern industrial complex that we'll talk about later. And so the Southerners feel very strangled by this, this tariff and begin the process of talking about nullifying any federal laws that are hurtful to the state. And this whole concept of states' rights begins. Andrew Jackson, to his credit, basically tells South Carolina, who is the focal point of all of this nullification concept. By the way, nullification also relates to if we don't like what the government, federal government is doing, we as a state can separate from the union. The concept is simple. We voluntarily came into the union, we can voluntarily leave the union as well. That's part of this nullification issue as well. So Andrew Jackson, to his credit, says, no, we're keeping the union together, and there's no way I'm going to allow you to do that. Anybody that talks about leaving the union, I'll personally come down and hang you. So this whole nullification issue is very big during this time, and hopefully we know will eventually lead to the Civil War, this whole idea of being able to walk away from the union. Another piece to Alexander Hamilton's administration that's interesting to say the least has to do with the bank that Alexander Hamilton created, where hopefully we understand that there's people, particularly in the South, that don't like Alexander Hamilton's bank, mostly because it helps the new textile mills, again, that we'll talk about later on. And it's not terribly helpful for the Southern planter class. Jackson is in that Southern planter class. He owns a plantation. He has his own slaves, etc. Basically, he decides he's going to destroy this bank, and I invite you to read more about that in the text, where he pulls all the federal money out of the banks, which basically will destroy the Bank of the United States. Let's see. That's all there is with that. I invite you to look at the videos, the video that I have posted in this let's see, let me go. Sorry about that. The video that I have posted in this weekly this weekly piece called Indian Removal Video, that talks about the last piece to this question of racism within the Jackson administration. First of all, the Jackson administration, Jackson himself is very racist. He has slaves, as I already said. does not believe that blacks are human beings and all that most um, slave owners follow. Not only that, but he horrendously takes the Indian population in the southeast, particularly like Alabama, Georgia, and that area, and move them west of the Mississippi River. And I would strongly suggest to you that you watch this video called Indian Removal Video, which will help you to on that piece to the first question in your unit exam. Okay, so that I think helps you to, on the Jackson, again, read the text, look at the videos, and I think that Jackson's pretty well covered. Okay, the second question has to do with this concept of manifest destiny, and really manifest destiny and Jackson kind of converge with one another. It happens at the same time. This idea that it is our destiny to move farther and farther west, to go from sea to shiny sea, and that is in week 11 you'll see Western expansion and manifest destiny. So the concept of manifest destiny, coined in 1845, it basically says that it is our God-given destiny to expand our dominion, to expand our democracy, and to expand our capitalism across the entire North American continent, to go from sea to shining sea. Now, who believes in this idea? Well, basically everybody. For the North, Western expansion is essential. They believe that it is essential because they need to expand on industrialization. In order for industrialization to expand, they need to have new resources, they need to have raw materials, they need to have a broader marketplace, and they need more consumers. Of course, the northern section is the one that is growing massively in terms of population, and we'll talk about the reasons for that in the third essay. But massive population growth and massive numbers of people pouring in, so the need for more and more Western land, that all comes into play for the North. For the South, the Western expansion is essential to expand on their economy. They're growing cotton production. What we need to understand is that by this time, these plantations had been in existence for a couple hundred years, and cotton is very bad for the soil. It destroys the soil, it takes all the nutrients out of the soil. And so there were plantations that, particularly in the coastal plantations that initially started back in the 1600s, where basically they weren't growing much of anything. The soil was too terrible, and so the Southerners had already begun the process of moving through Western Alabama, Western Georgia, Western Alabama, and continuing on the march into the Southwest to expand on the southern cotton production. So that's the reason why the Southerners wanted to expand farther and farther west. The problem with this expansion, and I say, what are the positive aspects of manifest destiny? And as I just said, the positive aspects are, moving people west, getting more resources and more land and all that. That's all positive for us. The negative aspect of it has to do with the people that get in our way in the process of moving more and more westward. As I said, the Jackson administration is very hurtful toward the Native Americans. Before Jackson became president, He was a general and went down into Florida and tried to get rid of the Seminole Indians in Florida. So, and they ended up going into the Everglades, and they never did get the Seminoles out of Florida. But that's the kind of mentality that Jackson had. He wanted to get rid of all the Native Americans. Although it didn't happen in his administration, it happens in the next administration. Jackson began the process of what we refer to as the Trail of Tears. Of course, the Trail of Tears is this route that the United States government forces the several tribes of Native Americans in primarily in the Alabama area. Tribes like the Cherokee, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creeks, force them on this march across the Mississippi River, excuse me, into what we call the Oklahoma Territory. Again, that's primarily pushed by Andrew Jackson. When we look at this, 3,500 of the 15,000 Creeks who set out for Oklahoma didn't make the trip. They died of all kinds of diseases, starvation. It's just not a good thing. Whooping cough, typhus, dysentery, cholera, starvation, etc. More than 5,000 Cherokee died on this journey. By 1840, tens of thousands of Native Americans had been driven off their land into the southeastern. They were in the southeastern states and forced to move across the Mississippi into what called the Indian Territory. This is going to lead to, after the Civil War, is going to lead to the great wars with the Native Americans out west. Okay, we're not going to talk about that, but here's a good example of how they viewed Native Americans. Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians. Kill and scalp all, big and little, nits make lice. He wanted to kill even the little children, the mothers, old people, children, massacres galore. And just not a pretty sight for American history. So I think that covers just about everything I wanted to cover for the first two essays. On the second video, we'll talk about industrialization. So that's where we'll head next.